From KCCI 8 News, this is a special presentation. Coffee with the Candidates.
Hello and welcome to our series, Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Amanda Rooker and today we're talking with Tim Scott. We're getting to know presidential candidates, going to towns all across the state so that Iowa voters can ask about the issues they care about. Today, we're in Polk City, in Polk County. 31% of active voters in Polk County are Republican. In 2016, 40% of voters in Polk County cast their ballots for Donald Trump. In 2020, 41% voted for Trump. We'll sit down with three undecided Republicans from right here in Polk County. They'll ask Tim Scott about the issues they care about over a cup of coffee. But first, let's take a look at Scott's background. Tim Scott has served as a U.S. Senator from South Carolina since 2013. He's the ranking member on the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. Prior to that, Scott served in the U.S. House of Representatives. Well, I'm joined today by South Carolina Senator and Republican presidential candidate Tim Scott. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, ma'am. It's good to be with y'all.
Well, on the campaign trail in Iowa, you talk a lot about restoring hope, and you often say that requires restoring American families. What do you mean by that, and what's the role of the president? What action can the president take to do that?
Yeah, so restoring hope to me really starts with education. I think Kim Reynolds, your governor, has done a fantastic job of making sure that every child in every zip code in the state has quality education as an option, with a $7,500 scholarship, 300% of poverty, then it goes to 400% of poverty, and then it's universal. That is one of the most important points I've been talking about on the campaign trail here in New Hampshire and South Carolina, is following the model of good leadership on the education front. As a kid who went to 4 different elementary schools, by the 4th grade, that is monumental for restoring hope. Creating a family unit is something that the government cannot do, but a president should use his bully pulpit to tell the American people the truth. Many of the problems that we face as a government, as a nation, cannot be solved by the government. And so we should encourage and inspire people to understand the path to prosperity, the path to opportunity, and that doesn't usually mean the government leads.
One thing you have talked about is wanting nationwide school choice.
Yes, ma'am.
If you were president, how would you do that? Through legislation, through executive order? What does nationwide school choice mean?
Yeah, so what I would do is I would ask Congress to pass a bill that would take the 2 major buckets of money that comes out of Washington, Title I and Title II dollars. Title I dollars is about somewhere around $30 billion that goes to the underperforming schools, putting those resources in a proverbial backpack, allowing the parent to choose the educational choice of their kid is the path forward. And the Title II dollars are those dollars for kids with special needs, giving parents a type of flexibility, whether it's a public school or a private school, a charter school, a home school, giving the parent an opportunity to specifically change the IEP, the individual education plan of their kid, by choosing the school they want the child to go to.
But states that don't have school choice laws, you wouldn't be talking to those states or creating some sort of federal policy saying states have to have a school choice.
I still believe in federalism. So what constrains the President of the United States is the fact that states should be in charge of education. However, we do send 2 major buckets of resources to the states. If you can't block grant those buckets, then why not make sure that those dollars follow the kid? That's something I would advocate on behalf of.
Another thing that you've advocated for is a 15-week federal abortion ban. One of your opponents, Nikki Haley, has said that a federal ban is unrealistic. She said it's unrealistic to say you could find consensus on that in Congress. Do you agree?
I think sometimes you learn a lot about a person by what they're willing to fight for. I would say to every Republican candidate, 3 out of 4 Americans agree that a 15-week limit makes complete sense. When every single Democrat present in the United States Senate voted for abortion on demand up until the day of birth, we need a president who will stand in the fire and preserve life. And a 15-week limit is something we should all advocate on behalf of. And frankly, if she's willing to fight for 60 votes to change Social Security recipients by means testing those benefits, why not fight for the preservation of life?
As president, what's your stance? Continuing sending aid to Ukraine or cutting that off?
Well, the first thing I would do as President of the United States is look into a camera and say to the American people, your vital national interest in Ukraine is degrading the Russian military. By doing so, you help keep the homeland safe and you safeguard NATO allies. NATO allies are necessary to preserve and protect because they're contiguous with Ukraine. The more we degrade the Russian military, the safer our nation is, and we will not be sending troops into harm's way if we degrade the Russian military.
One last question. You are running in still a pretty crowded Republican field,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
we haven't yet seen one person clearly stand out from the pack compared to former President Donald Trump. How do you plan to distinguish yourself as we get closer to the caucuses?
I think it's really important to continue with my optimistic, positive message spoken with a complete backbone, because the reality of it is the future of this nation can be very bright. We are not a nation in decline. Under President Biden, we are in a retreat, retreating from our values, retreating from hard work, retreating from personal responsibility. You want someone whose message is actually their life story. And the truth of my life destroys the lies of the radical left. And it's one of the reasons why I'm the candidate the radical left fears the most. If we want a Republican revolution and a red wave in this country, I need to be your nominee.
Well, Senator Scott, thank you so much. We're actually going to take it up a notch, and now a group of undecided Iowa Republicans are going to ask you their own questions. We'll have that in just a minute. We'll be right back.
Coffee with the Candidates continues right now.
Our conversation with Republican presidential candidate Tim Scott continues at Rising Sun Cafe in Polk City. We're joined by three undecided Iowa Republicans from right here in Polk County. Well, welcome back to Coffee with the Candidates. We're joined today by Tim Scott. Thanks so much for being here.
Yes, ma'am. It's good to be with you.
We're also here with a group of Iowa Republicans from Polk County. All three of you are undecided in who you plan to caucus for in January. Is that right?
Correct.
Right?
Well, all three of you will have the opportunity to ask Senator Scott some questions. I may jump in with a few follow-ups myself as well.
Very good.
Krista, we're going to start with you. And your
Okay.
husband is retired from working in law enforcement. You have two sons who both work in law enforcement,
Yes.
and you have some questions about their experiences.
Yes, one of my sons works in a state that is greatly affected by illegal immigrants, crime, and the homelessness. News outlets are now saying some states are giving driver's license to these illegals and then planning to give them automatic citizenship. How would you control crime, homelessness, and potential citizenship?
Well, those are three power-packed questions. Let's get started really quickly there. You have to remind me of all three of the questions if I miss one.
Sure.
Meander a little bit. But number one, we need to close our southern border. If you think about the impact that our open, unsafe, and insecure southern borders having on crime, it is devastating. Think about the fact that 70,000 Americans have lost their lives because of fentanyl in just the last 12 months. Much of it because the precursors come from China. They're manufactured in Mexican labs, and then the Mexican cartels bring them across our southern border. Closing our southern border is absolutely essential if we are going to improve and increase our national security and our local security. So another thing that we should do is to protect our law enforcement. Our law enforcement officers, unfortunately, because of the radical left, they've tried to defund the police. They demonize and demoralize police. We should respect, refund, and thank local law enforcement. And we can do that. I've been the lead negotiator on a number of the police reform legislations. I refuse to negotiate with our law enforcement's qualified immunity, which protects their retirement, protects their homes. If you're going to run into danger, the least we can do is have your back. Job number one for this nation. And then we should increase the funding on all the grants that come from the federal government for our local law enforcement. There's a reason why 1 in 5 positions in local law enforcement go unfilled. When you spend time disrespecting local law enforcement, it comes at a very high price. And we can change that by having a commander-in-chief that respects the police, that backs our law enforcement. As it relates to homelessness, mental health, we have a mental health crisis in our country. We have over 100,000 overdoses in the last year. Why? Mental instability. There's a lot of factors to it. But today we have 600,000 or 700,000 fewer rooms than we had in the 1980s for those who are mentally unstable. We should focus our attention and some of our resources in solving that problem. If we had all hands on deck, I think we'd have more solutions at the table. And frankly, the one thing I can tell you, solutions don't come from DC. We should make sure that we block grant resources to local programs that have proven results and provide more of those resources so we get better results. So was there another question?
Yes. How do we stop potential citizenship from these illegals?
Yeah, well, one of the things I said on the debate stage is I'm a big believer that our 14th Amendment does not apply to illegal immigrants who come to our country illegally. That will be a court battle. We may lose that court battle, just to be honest with you, but I think it's really important to recognize that the 14th Amendment and under the jurisdiction thereof, that was about slavery. It was not about immigration. We've applied it, in my opinion, unfairly to the issue of illegal immigrants. And think about it. There are thousands of people who fly to our nation to have their kids on American soil because they know that they have automatic birthright citizenship. I think we should challenge that in courts because being an American is something you should acclimate and assimilate to. It's really an important part of the DNA that makes America exceptional. We are, by the way, the most compassionate country on earth, and we should continue to be so. But there are rules you must follow to do it right, to preserve this goose that lays the golden eggs for the entire world.
Quick
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
follow up on that.
Yes.
On that debate stage, you talked a little bit with another candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, about immigration, and he has come out with a plan saying that he wants to end birthright citizenship in that specific instance, and that's part of his policy platform. If you were president, would you actively advocate to end birthright citizenship for the children of illegal immigrants, or how much of a policy priority would that be for you?
Well, I'd ask the courts to clarify what the position we can take. The 14th Amendment would require, I believe, a Supreme Court ruling to make the decision on what we can do about it. But I would absolutely engage our judicial branch in order to come to a complete, clear solution on whether or not the 14th Amendment applies to illegal immigrants as it relates to birthright citizenship, number one. Number two, I would finish the wall. For $10 billion in a nation that spends $7 trillion, we have the resources necessary to finish the wall. We do not have a president with the backbone to finish the wall, but we have the resources to do so. He is selling off the component parts to finishing the wall for pennies on the dollar. The second thing I would do is I would use the military-grade technology to surveil our border to slow down two things, human trafficking and fentanyl. We have the technology today for $5 billion that would get that job done. Third thing I would do is I would reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. It is really important that we establish boundaries for our country that starts before you get to our country. And then I would require anyone seeking asylum to seek it in a country contiguous with their country. So that's really important. Small but powerful. When people seeking asylum come into our country and they're sent to New York City, their court date, 2033. 10 years away. I'm not sure that we should ever expect them to show up in court. I think it's ridiculous. What we've learned with these sanctuary cities is that once they start feeling the actual pressure of illegal immigration, they change their tune, as we say back at home, quick, fast, and in a hurry. And so we need more of that pressure applied on sanctuary cities. And as President of the United States, I would do everything I possibly could to eliminate sanctuary cities in our country. And then finally, Title 42 reduced the flow of immigration during the COVID crisis. We no longer have the COVID crisis, but we do have a healthcare crisis called fentanyl. That allows us to reinstate something like Title 42. By doing so, we stem the tide of illegal immigration in our country, which is absolutely essential in preserving our nation. I've said it several times. If you don't control your back door, it's probably not your house anymore. If you don't control your southern border, it might not be our country for long.
That's right.
Well, shifting topics a little bit away from immigration, I want to talk with Joyce here. Joyce is a retired pharmacist. She has a question about health care.
I do.
Well, I have the answer, but you have it better than I do since you're a pharmacist. Let me, listen, I'll listen to her.
No, it's easy. Drug companies spend billions of dollars on TV advertisement, and every time we turn on TV, we see those ads. What would you do? This does add to the unaffordability of medications. What would you do to stem the medication costs?
Well, there's a couple things I think we should do off the top. Number one, you know this better than I. The PBMs, pharmaceutical benefit managers, increase the price of our drugs by, on average, over 30%. And what benefit we get for that middleman managing the price of our drugs, I don't know that there is any benefit. Like, so you're a pharmacist, so you may know more than I on this one, but I don't think there's any benefit. Having a middleman increase the price of our drugs without any benefit to the patient is, in my opinion, ridiculous. So eliminating that is job number one. Number two, we need to accelerate the path to making it easier for medicines to get to the market faster. They tell me the average process is about $1.5 to $1.7 billion to develop a new drug, with many of the drugs failing. So one of the things that we can do through innovation is find the anomalies that stops drugs from being effective, that would accelerate the path for the patent protection to be secured, and then move those drugs to the marketplace so that we can quicker go to generic medicine. That would reduce the price precipitously on the cost of drugs. One of the things that we do celebrate as a nation is about 92 to 93% of the daily regimens that we are on, whether it's one of the three morbidities, high blood pressure, cholesterol issues, diabetes 2, those drugs are now for a 30-day supply under $5. The more we move towards the personalization of medicine, the therapies and the treatments becoming unique to individuals, those prices are spiking. I have a friend of mine who's given me permission to say this, but just 2 weeks ago, his wife, who has a lung issue, had to start receiving a treatment to help save her life over time. It's $30,000 a month for her medicine. And I know what he makes. And he's like, Tim, I'm not sure what the out-of-pocket expense is going to be, but I know I can't afford it. Under this Biden administration and this economy, 40% extra for gas, 20% extra for food, 20% extra for electricity, and an out-of-pocket expense that is unbelievable. One of the things we did for our seniors in the last Congress, not this Congress, last Congress, is we were able to cap out-of-pocket expenses. And that's a really good thing. Going forward, reintroducing competition in the market, one of the things that we've seen a loss of because of Obamacare is actual competition in the healthcare market. The federal government pays over I think somewhere between $2 and $2.5 trillion of the healthcare spend in this country. Any single payer system, the closer we get to one, prices go up, quality goes down, and access starts to shrink. We need to find ways to reintroducing competition in the market. I think Americans should get first stab, so to speak, first opportunity for some of the latest, greatest new drugs and therapies coming to the market. we can get that done if we use innovation to find those anomalies, reduce the amount of time it takes to get a drug to the marketplace, which will reduce the cost and get a better ROI for the American people.
Thank you.
Our next question is going to come from Dick. Dick is retired from the Army. He's also a retired businessman. And he has a question for you about government spending.
But Dick is also a Green Beret,
Yes.
which means I'm afraid.
Former.
Thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
25 years, I
Thank
think we
you.
said before the cameras went on. We should stop every single time we see a veteran and thank them.
Thank you.
We get to live in peace because of people like you.
Thank you.
God bless you.
It's a pleasure.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But when Congress passes any spending bill, such as defense authorization or transportation, those bills are usually loaded with earmarks and amendments and pet projects costing billions of dollars, as you well know,
Yes, sir.
that we don't see as the taxpayer. So why is that not a fraudulent deal? And why isn't each item presented for approval specifically on its own merit? And what would you do about that runaway expense?
Dick, that's what we call common sense. I love what you're thinking there. We need more of that in Congress. Will you please run? You got some good Congress members here, but we need one more. There's no doubt that one of the things I introduced and was the co-sponsor of is something called the REINS Act. What the REINS Act basically says is anytime you introduce a new form of regulation that costs more than $100 million, it needs to go through some form of scrutiny so we understand and appreciate its economic impact and whether it's duplicative in nature. If it is, we should find ways to eliminate old bureaucracy in place of something that hopefully reduces the cost and improves the quality. From a budgetary standpoint, the one thing I have never done, ever, is ask for a single earmark, period. We should never ask for earmarks. That is a part of the leverage point for leadership to get what they want by giving you pennies on the dollar. I think the elimination earmarks have just been reintroduced a couple of years, last year I believe it was. In my opinion, eliminating earmarks is the way you eliminate a part of the perverse incentive for more spending. And then having simpler bills is really important. You look at the legislation I have sponsored, written in Congress. One of them is called the Opportunity Zones. Opportunity Zones uses the capital gains tax as an incentive to get more money in our devastated areas. Not a single federal dollar. Very simple legislation. Gave the powers to the governor, and we reduced poverty in 2019 to one of the lowest levels in the history of the country. There are ways for us to write simple legislation and then get rid of these buses. The minibus and the omnibus are basically transportation vehicles for lots of legislation to be coupled together, and then no one knows what they're voting for. A lot easier just to vote no, because you're going to regret something in there anyways. And that's what I've consistently done.
We're running low on time, but I have a quick follow-up on that, but I want to continue getting to our questions from our panel as well. But quickly, you're the only congressional member Republican running for the Republican nomination right now.
Yes.
We saw, you're in the Senate, but over on the House side, we saw American history, the first sitting speaker to be removed, Kevin McCarthy, no longer Speaker of the House. I'm wondering if you could react to that, but also if you were president, how would you restore American trust in Congress when we're seeing unprecedented chaos?
Well, one of the things I've said for the last few years is that the road to socialism runs right through a divided Republican Party. And what we'll see as a result of yesterday is more consternation, more frustration, and less progress on some of the underlying issues that we, your servants, should be focusing on. We ought not be focusing on personalities and individual spats between members. We should actually focus on the reason why you all elected us, to do the work of the American people and to put our egos to the side. That challenge will play out. Think about it this way. Instead of focusing yesterday or today or for the next couple of weeks on the southern border, they're focusing on who's running for speaker. Yeah. Instead of focusing on Bidenomics and the misery that the average family has lost thousands of dollars of spending power because of his inflationary impacts, they're focusing on a food fight within Republicans. that always turns out poorly for the American people. As President of the United States, the one thing I would do is model the behavior I want people to follow. We should lead by example. We've heard it before. You would not hear it in my administration. All I need is a phone and a pen. That's wrong. Congress writes the laws. The president has the power to veto, to use the bully pulpit, to encourage the American people to call their elected officials. Having been a member of Congress, I'm a big believer in term limits. I've term limited myself because someone else can do this job. I believe being a servant for a specific period of time, going home. That alone would reduce this generational service. And there's some good ones, don't get me wrong. But by and large, we need all of us working on a term limit. As the old song says, hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more. That's my definition of a term limit.
Well, we only have a minute left.
Yes, ma'am.
So Joyce, you're going to have our last question.
Okay.
And it's on abortion, which has become a major topic in the race for the Republican nomination.
As a Republican Party,
Yes, ma'am.
we lose votes for the young women between the ages of 20 and 40. And that's because I think our stance on abortion maybe needs to be lightened up a little bit. But do you think that abortion should be between a woman's physician and the woman herself?
Here's where I'm 100% pro-life conservative. I have a 100% pro-life voting record. What I have said as the President of the United States, I would advocate on for a 15-week national limit. I believe that 15 weeks is a position where 3 out of 4 Americans are. Our most enthusiastic pro-life organizations agree that that is a place where we are actually making concessions to move this issue forward. What I want to do is stop what happened earlier this year. Every Senate Democrat who was present voted for abortion on demand up until the day of birth. A 15-week national limit would stop that from happening, and it's a place where the majority of women and the majority of men both agree, 3 out of 4 Americans on that issue.
Well, that's all the time that we have for television. Thank you, Senator, so much for joining us, and thank you to our panel as well.
Thank y'all.
Our conversation with Tim Scott will continue. You can watch that extended discussion on our mobile app or online at kcci.com. Thanks for joining us for Coffee with the Candidates. Have a great day.